Welcome back to Strides to Solutions. I'm Esther Adams, and today we're exploring something that might change how you think about athletic training altogether. We tend to focus on the physical side of sports strength, speed, endurance, flexibility, but there's a cognitive dimension to athletic performance that researchers are only now beginning to map in detail, and it has to do with how the brain learns to predict the future, not in some mystical sense, of course. I'm talking about anticipatory control, the brain's ability to forecast what's about to happen and prepare responses before events actually unfold. And it turns out that different types of sports train this capacity in dramatically different ways. The distinction researchers make is between open skill and closed skill sports. Closed skill sports are things like swimming, gymnastics, weightlifting, archery, activities where the environment is relatively stable and predictable. You're performing a routine or executing a movement in conditions you can largely control. The pool doesn't suddenly change shape. The barbell doesn't decide to move on its own. Open skill sports are different. Think soccer, basketball, tennis, martial arts, activities where you're constantly reading and reacting to other people, where the environment is dynamic and often unpredictable. Your opponent might feint left and go right. Your teammate might make an unexpected run. The ball might take a weird bounce. You have to process all this information in real time and adjust your actions accordingly, often under severe time pressure. What researchers have been discovering is that this distinction isn't just about physical demands, it shapes the brain itself. A study comparing young soccer players to swimmers illustrates this beautifully. The researchers designed a whole body game that required participants to anticipate and react to challenges. What they found was that soccer players showed significantly better proactive control. They were more effective at setting up anticipatory postural adjustments, maintained better stability, and fell less often when anticipation was required. Here's what's interesting, though. When the task was purely reactive, when there was no opportunity to anticipate and you just had to respond to something that already happened, the two groups performed similarly. The swimmers weren't worse at reacting, they were specifically worse at anticipating. This suggests that open skill sports are training something particular about the brain's predictive machinery. Soccer players aren't just developing faster reflexes, they're developing better forward models, internal simulations that run slightly ahead of real time, allowing them to pre configure their bodies for what's about to happen rather than waiting for it to happen and then responding. The neural evidence supports this. Meta analyses of brain imaging studies show that open skill athletes have adaptations in networks supporting attention, decision making, and action anticipation. These athletes show stronger connectivity between regions involved in visual processing, motor planning, and executive control. Their brains appear to be wired for the kind of rapid, flexible prediction that dynamic environments demand. One study looked specifically at athletes' performance on working memory and cognitive flexibility tasks, not sport specific tasks, but general cognitive measures. Open skill athletes outperformed closed skill athletes. And here's a fascinating wrinkle. Closed skill athletes who had more experience with open skill sports earlier in their development also showed better executive functions. The benefits of that dynamic, cognitively demanding environment seem to leave lasting traces, even in people who later specialized in more predictable activities. I find this particularly interesting because it suggests there might be sensitive periods for developing certain cognitive capacities, or at least that early exposure to prediction demanding environments has effects that persist. The brain imaging work goes deeper. When researchers look at how athletes' brains handle action, anticipation, and motor imagery, mentally simulating movements, they find what's been called a nested frontoparietal temporal prediction network. That's a mouthful, but what it means is that athletes develop an integrated system spanning frontal regions involved in planning, parietal regions involved in spatial processing and attention, and temporal regions involved in perceiving and interpreting actions. Non athletes, by contrast, tend to rely more heavily on visual regions when doing similar tasks. They're processing what they see more passively, while athletes are actively generating predictions and simulations. The athletic brain isn't just watching, it's modeling, anticipating, preparing. There's also evidence of what researchers call neural efficiency. Across multiple studies, athletes show better performance with reduced or more focused brain activation. Their brains are doing more with less, particularly when dealing with upcoming events and unexpected situations. It's as if the prediction machinery has been streamlined through practice, requiring fewer resources to achieve better outcomes. One electroencephalography study of expert basketball players examined how they performed under severe time pressure. When there's no time to gather more information, you have to rely on what you already expect, your priors, in statistical terms. The expert players showed a shift toward more top down, expectation driven strategies. They preserved their ability to use prior information even when time was crushing. Their brains defaulted to prediction when reaction wasn't fast enough. So far, this might sound like a straightforward story. Complex, unpredictable environments train better prediction. Chaos is good for the brain, but the research gets more complicated when you look at what happens when uncertainty becomes extreme or chronic. There's a line of studies on sensory motor adaptation, how people learn to adjust their movements when something about the environment changes. Think of putting on prism glasses that shift your visual field, or walking on a treadmill with split belts moving at different speeds. Your brain has to update its internal models to account for the new relationship between your intentions and what actually happens. What researchers found is that prior exposure to unpredictable balance perturbations actually impaired later adaptation to a new, consistent force field. People who had experienced more uncertainty showed larger errors, slower adaptation, and weaker anticipatory strategies than people who hadn't been exposed to that uncertainty. This seems counterintuitive. If uncertainty trains prediction, shouldn't people with uncertainty experience be better at adapting? But what appears to happen is that chronic unpredictability reduces error sensitivity. The brain learns, essentially, that prediction errors don't reliably indicate what needs to change, so it downweights them. It shifts toward protective, cautious control rather than aggressive model updating. This makes sense from a certain perspective. If you're in an environment where things are constantly and randomly changing, it might not be adaptive to update your internal models based on every error. You'd be chasing noise. Better to be conservative, maintain stability, protect yourself from falls or injuries. Computational models of sensory motor learning capture this dynamic. When error information is uncertain, the effective learning rate naturally decreases. The brain doesn't update as much per error because it can't trust that the error reflects something systematic about the world. This isn't a bug, it's a feature of Bayesian inference, which is thought to underlie much of how the brain handles uncertainty. So we have what looks like a paradox. Open skill sports, which involve a lot of uncertainty, seem to enhance predictive abilities. But laboratory studies of uncertainty in motor learning show that it can impair adaptation. How do we reconcile this? I think the key is the type of uncertainty and what the brain learns to do with it. In open skill sports, uncertainty isn't random, it's structured. Your opponent isn't a random number generator. They have tendencies, patterns, tells. The ball follows physics. The game has rules. The brain can learn to extract predictable features from apparent chaos, to find the signal in the noise. Laboratory perturbation studies, by contrast, often use genuinely random disturbances with no underlying structure to learn. There's nothing to predict, so the brain correctly learns that prediction isn't useful in that context. This distinction matters practically. It suggests that not all complexity is created equal for training purposes. Random variability might actually undermine the predictive systems we want to develop. Structured variability, the kind found in real sports and real interactions, might be what actually builds those anticipatory capacities. There's another piece of this puzzle worth examining: the question of whether you need real world chaos or whether carefully designed training can achieve similar effects. Researchers have been exploring this through various interventions. Exergame training, exercise video games that combine physical movement with cognitive demands, has shown promise for improving cognitive flexibility, divided attention, and inhibitory control. Dual task training paradigms, where people have to balance while doing a cognitive task or make decisions while moving, can reduce prefrontal activation while improving performance, suggesting more efficient resource allocation. Perceptual cognitive training using video clips of sports situations has improved anticipation accuracy in novices, even under high cognitive load. The training shifted attention toward key motion regions and enhanced the mental representation of actions. People got better at reading subtle kinematic cues, the small movements that signal what someone is about to do before they do it. Virtual reality training for complex movements has produced improvements in movement quality that transfer across body segments. The rich visual and kinematic information available in well designed simulations appears to support learning in ways similar to real practice. What this suggests is that the critical ingredients might not be real opponents and real stakes, but rather ecological validity and complexity of the training tasks. If you can create situations that demand rapid prediction, flexible adjustment, and integration of multiple information sources, you might be able to target the same brain systems that open skill sports develop. But, and this is an important caveat, the research also consistently shows that expert advantages are largely task specific and domain specific. Getting better at reading badminton opponents doesn't necessarily make you better at reading soccer opponents, let alone better at general motion perception in everyday life. Transfer is limited. The prediction machinery gets optimized for the specific context in which it's trained. This might be disappointing if you were hoping for a magic training regimen that would make you a better predictor across the board, but it's also informative about how these systems work. They're learning specific statistical regularities of specific environments, not developing some abstract general purpose prediction capacity. There's a fascinating research gap worth mentioning here. A lot of work has been done on how autonomous systems, robots, self-driving cars, learn to predict human behavior. Machine learning researchers have developed sophisticated algorithms for trajectory prediction, intention inference, collision avoidance, but almost nothing has been done on the reverse question. Do humans who frequently coordinate with autonomous systems develop better predictive timing accuracy? Think about professional pilots who work with autopilot systems, or drivers who use advanced driver assistance technologies, or factory workers who collaborate with robotic systems. These people are constantly coordinating their actions with machines that have their own dynamics and behaviors. Do they develop enhanced temporal prediction, better time to collision estimation, more accurate intercept timing? We don't know. The studies simply haven't been done. Researchers have focused on making machines better at predicting us, not on whether working with machines changes how we predict. It's an open empirical question, and I suspect the answer would tell us something important about the flexibility and plasticity of human predictive systems. Let me shift to talking about attachment and coordination in a slightly different sense. What happens when athletes have to work together rather than against each other? Team sports involve what researchers call co-regulation, continuous mutual adjustment between people who are trying to achieve shared goals. You're not just predicting what your opponent will do, you're also coordinating with teammates whose actions affect yours and whose success depends on how well you mesh. Athletes in co-regulated systems show what you might expect: superior perceptual cognitive skills, better anticipation, more rapid and accurate decision making. But the evidence for what researchers call predictive flexibility, the ability to adapt predictions on the fly when circumstances change, is more limited and appears to be task specific. There's interesting work on cognitive load here. When you add cognitive demands to motor tasks, asking people to count backwards while balancing or make decisions while running, performance typically suffers. There are cognitive costs to doing multiple things at once. But some research shows that well designed task combinations can actually produce inverse costs, better performance than single task conditions. This is counterintuitive but important. It suggests that for some people, in some contexts, the additional complexity actually helps rather than hurts. One interpretation is that the cognitive task might prevent overthinking or excessive conscious control of movements that are better left to automatized systems. Another is that certain combinations engage integrated networks that work together more effectively than the components would separately. Dual task training interventions support this possibility. In populations ranging from healthy young adults to people with Parkinson's disease, practicing cognitive motor dual tasks reduces the performance cost of doing both simultaneously. The brain appears to learn more efficient ways of allocating resources between cognitive and motor demands. I want to spend some time on the neuroscience of how these predictive systems actually work, because I think it illuminates why training effects are both real and limited. When you anticipate an action, whether it's an opponent's serve or a teammate's pass, your brain is doing something remarkable. It's running an internal simulation, generating a prediction about what's going to happen based on partial information about what's happening now. This simulation recruits motor regions even though you're not moving yet. Your brain is essentially practicing the response before it's needed. Meta analyses of neuroimaging studies show that athletes have developed what researchers call more integrated prediction networks. The frontal regions that plan actions, the parietal regions that process space and attention, and the temporal regions that perceive and interpret movements are more strongly connected in athletes. Information flows between these areas more efficiently. This integration appears to support both internal simulation, imagining or predicting actions, and external anticipation, reading what others are about to do. The same networks handle both, which makes sense. To predict what someone else will do, it helps to simulate doing it yourself. This is sometimes called motor resonance or the mirror system, though the actual neuroscience is more complex than popular accounts suggest. The efficiency findings are particularly interesting. You might expect that expert performance would require more brain activation, more neurons firing, more processing power dedicated to the task. But the opposite is often true. Experts show more focused, economical patterns of activation. They're achieving better outcomes with less apparent neural effort. This suggests that training doesn't just add capacity, it reshapes the underlying computations. Novices might be engaging in more trial and error, more conscious deliberation, more widespread neural search for the right response. Experts have learned to cut straight to the relevant information and the appropriate action, pruning away the unnecessary processing. Volleyball players, for instance, show enhanced connectivity between visual, somatosensory, and motor regions. The sport demands rapid integration of what you see, the ball, other players, what you feel, your body position, the court beneath your feet, and what you do, move, jump, hit. The brain appears to build stronger highways between these processing centers. Basketball players under time pressure show preserved use of prior information, their expectations about what's likely to happen based on the game situation, the opponent's tendencies, the score, the clock. When there's no time to gather more data, they rely more heavily on what they already know. And crucially, their expectations are better calibrated than novices would be. They know what to expect because they've seen thousands of similar situations. So, what should we take away from all this research? First, the type of sport or training you do matters for cognitive development, not just physical development. Open skill, dynamic, unpredictable environments appear to build predictive capacities that closed skill, stable environments don't develop to the same degree. This has implications for youth sport programs, rehabilitation protocols, and lifelong fitness choices. Second, uncertainty is a double edged sword. Structured unpredictability, the kind found in games and sports with rules and opponents who have learnable patterns, seems to enhance prediction. But random, unstructured unpredictability can actually impair the brain's willingness to update its models. Not all challenge is good challenge. Third, the brain changes in response to prediction demands. Neural efficiency increases, network integration strengthens, anticipatory systems become more refined. These aren't just performance improvements, they're actual changes in how the brain processes information. Fourth, transfer is limited. Getting better at prediction in one domain doesn't automatically generalize to other domains. The brain is learning specific statistical structures of specific environments, not building a universal prediction engine. Fifth, controlled training can target some of the same mechanisms as real world sports, but ecological validity matters. The closer the training approximates the demands of real performance, time pressure, multiple information sources, meaningful consequences, the more likely it is to produce relevant adaptations. And finally, there are big open questions. We don't know whether working with autonomous systems changes human prediction. We don't know the optimal developmental timing for exposure to complexity. We don't know how to maximize transfer between trained and untrained domains. The field is still young. What I find most compelling about this research is how it reveals the brain as a prediction machine. We don't experience the world passively. We're constantly generating expectations about what's coming next and preparing responses in advance. Athletes have honed this capacity through thousands of hours of practice in environments that punish bad predictions and reward good ones. In a sense, every catch, every dodge, every perfectly timed pass represents a small triumph of the brain's forecasting systems. The ball was there and the hand was there because the brain predicted where both would be and coordinated the interception milliseconds before it happened. We all have this capacity. It's fundamental to being a moving, acting organism in a dynamic world. But like any capacity, it can be developed, refined, specialized. Athletes show us what's possible when prediction systems are pushed to their limits. The practical implications extend beyond sports. Rehabilitation programs for movement disorders might benefit from incorporating prediction demanding tasks. Educational interventions for children might consider how different activities develop cognitive flexibility and anticipation. Workplace safety programs might recognize that some environments train better prediction than others. And for anyone who plays a sport, coaches a team, or just wants to understand why some activities feel more mentally demanding than others, the science of anticipatory control offers a window into what's actually happening in the brain when you face an opponent, read the play, and act before you even consciously know what you're doing. The research is telling us that those moments of fluid, seemingly automatic expertise aren't magic. They're the result of neural systems optimized through experience to see the future. Just a little bit, just enough, just in time. Until next time, I'm Esther Adams. Take care of yourselves and keep moving.